Hello and welcome to another episode of PrecisionCycle BTS. This is Enrique Artiaga, Elevate.epo. Thank you very much for joining me today. BTS is an opportunity for me to talk about some casework through our PrecisionCycle offering. It is our premier offering at Elevate.epo. Just really quickly, want to thank everyone for tuning in and for making PrecisionCycle part of their media consumption. Thank you to everyone who has tuned in to PrecisionCycle. We have some pretty major growth in the past month, moving from 30,000 views via all social media sites in May to an astounding 128,000 total views in June. That is a 328% growth. That cannot be done without your help. Thank you to everyone who has made PrecisionCycle part of their day. Really appreciate it. We are hoping to push that number further, and thank you very much to everyone who has left comments, interacted, liked, subscribed, and has utilized some information that we put out there for their use. Last week's BTS, we dealt with some pretty major issues with some clients. This week, I want to feature 3 clients who have essentially come with a lot of the same types of issues going on with their major themes for the week has been projective identification, displacement, covert narcissism, conditional attachment, and reparenting. Those are topics that have been consistently brought up throughout various cases and indicative of some of the pressures that a lot of our clients face today in the world at large. I want to go back and talk a bit about 3 clients who found out the hard way this week that love is conditional and there are strings attached at times, even with people who are our close family members and who say and claim that they continue to love us. We reveal how conditional love, financial manipulation, legacy narcissism acts as a quiet but devastating force in the lives of 3 clients. Again, we'll be talking about Dave. We'll also be talking about a client named Megan and an update on client Shane, who is also going through some pretty traumatic experiences recently, having just lost a former partner and their grandparent within the span of 5 days. But through those cases, we've seen how the psychological double bind that exists to conform is the feature in a lot of these relationships, to which the antidote is the PrecisionCycle matrix, the boundaries and the clarity that comes from understanding how recalibration and one's own self-awareness within their environment helps them navigate a lot of those narcissistic pitfalls that they encounter. Let's break down from a client perspective some of the things that we saw. With Dave, there was an upfront clear understanding of what was going on with their family. He essentially had a conversation with his son, who along with his daughter-in-law are managing his finances because there has been a significant history of financial issues with Dave. The thing that we're seeing here is Dave took it upon himself to have a conversation with his family and openly just discussed what would happen, what would it look like if he took back control of his own finances, to which the family pretty much said that you're on your own. We'd cut you off essentially, and we would no longer be part of your life. We see how that essentially opened the facade here and got Dave to understand that a lot of the love that he does experience is conditional. Meanwhile, he also saw that his wife was also beginning to undermine him emotionally, essentially giving him another ultimatum that said that he's only good when he's on his medications, and if he ever goes off of his medications, that she wouldn't be able to deal with him anymore. Again, we see how this family unit has developed a sense of conditional love that Dave now has to balance within himself, because he's essentially being told there are strings attached to our love. Whether or not that's appropriate or not, that's definitely up to interpretation, but the ultimate reality here is that these conditional love components illustrate the power and the narcissism that money malignantly creates within people starts to bleed over and really start to opaque relationships. Dave had expressed a desire to talk to his physicians to get off some of these prescription drugs he was on because they weren't making him feel completely present. They were making him feel as if he was not able to have control of his life, always run down, disoriented, and cognitively at a disadvantage. And that's his right to discuss that. But as he continued to see the family intruding into those types of decisions, He also began to see that a lot of this control was being parceled out to the family, and they were just operating in a way where he does feel like a battery in the matrix, there to collect the paycheck through his disability and provide that for the financial stability of the family in their golden years. This does not sit well with Dave, because then that made him essentially feel dehumanized and as if his only real purpose in life was to be this source of income for the family. There was an interesting moment of symbology where he discussed a car he used to own and how it was full of dirt and just not something that had resembled the pride of his original investment into it, because his family had filled it, owned substances and junk in essence, and that stopped being really his and had just morphed into this sort of bigger thing that the family was now owning. This was representative of years of emasculation, rage and repressed revenge, him essentially putting all these things in this car and it becoming full of dirt. From an imagery standpoint, he was able to draw out in session, and we took that and looked at it further to understand he's living with a lot of internalized shame because he has given up a lot. He has ceded a lot of his power to his family, and his family is very obviously taking advantage of him in a certain capacity. We see here from the psychological frame, there's a covert conservatorship occurring, and the family is gaslighting him into that. He came to the realization that he was in a Britney Spears type of situation where he didn't necessarily ever go to a judge who had given that power to his family, but his power had secretly placed him into this pseudo conservatorship position through Dave's lack of boundaries. And that's really where we started to hit back at how do we control our life. We come back to it with boundaries, and we'll get to that in a little bit. I want to also talk about my second client, Megan. She was someone who came in and processed how they had a understanding with their parent about utilizing savings accounts and the money and how that would be saved, to the point where parents decided that it would be more beneficial to move the money outside of a bank and just put in a safe. They had processed how at the time they didn't really think about it because they were really enthralled into a really severe eating disorder, which had them admitted into a residential program. Since then, as they've worked to regain and recalibrate balance in their life, they've come to the realization they need to access some of that money to pay for extra bills this summer and enjoy some vacation time. When they asked for access to this money, they were met with a lot of resistance. A symbol of that isn't so much just money at this point, it's the price that Megan has to pay in order to be seen. The withholding as an emotional starvation is a psychological frame here for what's happening with Megan. The family is gaining control of this person who's in her 20s by physically holding on to money that belongs opaquely to her and has never really been fully defined. That has led to a lot of gaslighting and digital performance by the way of leaving people on not being able to respond clearly to clear texts asking whether they have access to the funds, being challenged when they do ask for those funds with questions regarding how it's going to be used and why it's necessary, when in reality that money, if it is truly theirs, should exist with access without strings attached. We see here how the family has gone into this covert narcissistic position where, much like Dave, they are also now operating in this pseudo conservatorship. Rather than being met with a response that would have helped them gain access to that money and be able to utilize it for their bills, they were met with more questions about why don't they go out and get summer jobs, and why don't they go out and do things that could produce more money, rather than just a clear understanding of these are the funds that are available in my account and I should just have access to it. But most importantly was this relationship that Megan has with her father, who has essentially learned the tricks of the covert narcissism digital features, which are leaving people on, using iPhone tricks to make sure that they read messages without it registering as turning off receipts, and really reverting back to the borderline positions where immature people in the dating scene wanting to not register the personal ego hit of reading something and having to respond and playing these games with their own daughter is something Megan was really working to understand. We broke it down that parents themselves are narcissists and are immature. Megan had to get to a point where she had to essentially reparent herself and her parents by being direct and by putting down significant boundaries that now get them the answers and the clarity that they need. The thing that sort of highlighted this session was the quote, "He wants to be my dad, but he acts like my boyfriend and my banker." There we see the innate understanding Megan has that there's this dual relationship occurring with her father, a result of control and narcissistic tendencies of parents. Shane faces 2 major losses after losing their former partner, and then 5 days later losing their grandmother, but still finding it within themselves to remain 6 weeks sober. Precision Cycle has been able to help Shane with understanding the sobriety component and how to sit with these negative emotions manifested by all this loss. Now Shane's able to reconcile all these different feelings, find ways to dial down the typical behaviors, which used to be going to bottles and engaging in alcoholic behavior. Shane's recognizing that they do feel like a guest in their own body, but they refuse to numb out. And instead, they're setting boundaries with their parent, setting boundaries with themselves to avoid relapse, and utilizing other components, in this case, a baseball game, to remain grounded rather than going out and chasing dopamine with narcissistic behaviors that they have engaged with in the past. The baseball game here is a symbol that we really utilize in the session, an indicator that life is still happening. Even when we're hurting, we can take moments to ground ourselves in our environment and the people that we're with and what we're experiencing, and utilize that as the frameworks to build our own grounding methods. What we did with Shane, moved them away from being in the spiral that they were in to having them name a few things that they had seen at the baseball game. They were able to recall some baseball plays, some baseball players, moments throughout that experience, and that was very calibrating because it helped them regain footing into a grounded state and understand that their sobriety was not subject to the whims of others. They could actually have control sitting there with people who were drinking around them. They were able to utilize other components to remain sober and calibrated. One of the things Shane was able to do, now that we're putting them in a position where they're psychologically reframing a lot of their perspective, was that the sobriety that they experienced in their 20s was a rite of emotional adulthood. They had to go through that in order to understand that wasn't something that they wanted. There was something that was an experience. It was something that they could look back on with no real fondness or disappointment or shame, but really look at it as, I've spent this 10 years in this lifestyle, which gave me the data to say, I don't want to be in that lifestyle anymore. I want to choose a different path. So rather than sit in the shame of, I wasted 10 years of my life, the past 10 years was data that informs me on my future. All this while still dealing with the loss of the ex-partner and now the grandmother. We want to walk through the themes of the week here and understand the things that we were seeing. There were 4 major themes that our clients presented with. One of them was the concept of conditional love as psychological violence. Do what I say, or I'll leave you. That's not parenting. It's emotional blackmail. When people put conditions on your presence and their love and what they're going to express to you, that's not true love. That's conditional love, and that's not necessarily being a family. That's someone having an expectation and wanting to control you. That is covert narcissism 101. And that's something that is very prevalent throughout relationships. Ultimatums are never good in recovery. They are never good in any type of mental health recalibration, because you're not necessarily giving the person autonomy. You're still treating them as children, withholding that control element from them. If they don't have control of their own lives, then how can they ever be autonomous? Conditional love teaches the child that survival is dependent on obedience, not a relationship. And that is something classic we see in multiple families. The idea that we have to perform in order to receive love, that's not true love. That's narcissistic engagement, and no one has to dance or perform for anyone's love. It should come automatic from family members who claim that they love you. The precision cycle reframe here is love as collaboration, not compliance. We look to make sure we are establishing love and illustrating love with boundaries. Even as someone who is not receiving that fully from our partners or in family, we need to illustrate that we are able to love and be loved, but also implement the boundaries. and make sure that love lives within a framework, protecting us emotionally and our egos from being hit and wounded, but also protecting us from covert narcissism that presents itself on a grand scale at times. Financial control as emotional leverage, that is the second theme of the week. That lives with the conditional love element that was just mentioned. But in both Dave and Megan's cases, money became the leash. When your autonomy is only tolerated if someone else is in charge, you're not loved, you're managed. That's middle management. You're just an employee at that point because it comes about a metric. You having to prove something in order for you to receive something. Conditional love, but we see how financial control becomes this soft power leash that people will exercise to control our emotions, establish the emotional terrorism that is oftentimes the case when we feel we need these controlling matrices to our personality. And what we saw in both Megan and Dave was both of them essentially said the same thing. Healing begins when you say, I won't trade my peace for proximity. And that's really the trade-off here. What's more important? Is it the amount of money that squabbling about, or is it the peace of mind of knowing that the people who are around you actually want to be around you and aren't they just there to tolerate you? These were some very clear breakthrough moments for these clients. They understood clearly that they weren't the problem. The problem is their family and their relentless need to have to control them because of some perceived fault. That is really clarity in these two clients. The third theme that we saw was displacement and projection as family tactics. Dave's wife and son tag teamed his emotional regulation by projecting their instability. Megan's dad can't tolerate them growing up, so he calls it irresponsibility. Shane's mom and dad follow a similar playbook, but now Shane's not falling for it. She's seeing through it and she's understanding that if she's able to deliver clear and concise boundaries, both to mom and dad, that the space will exist for them to process emotions more clearly, effectively, and with a lot more self-calibration attached. All of them essentially came to say the exact same thing in one way or another. They weren't helping me manage my emotions. They're trying to own my emotions. The fourth theme of the week was the myth of the problem child. Dave is constantly told and gaslit that he's crazy, that he needs to be on meds, that he's not allowed and incapable of managing his own life. Megan's told that she's untrustworthy and that she can't have any real autonomy because she doesn't really have the capabilities to manage her own life. Shane was called the black sheep of the family until they became the backbone of the family. This is what happens when systems need a scapegoat to hide their own dysfunction. They always find someone, usually the one with the most clarity, to cast all of their shame onto and projective identify within them all the negative aspects of their own personalities because they realize that this person can see through the game and is understanding what's going on with the dynamics. One thing that this brought up was the narrative arc of Sisyphus. Sisyphus was ultimately right. When you tell the truth, you get called crazy. If we remember the tale of Sisyphus, he was someone who had ratted out Zeus, that he had abducted the river god's daughter. Sisyphus challenged that. Essentially, it was the challenge to the gods of, hey, you're just as corrupt as anybody else. He was punished to roll a boulder up a hill for eternity. This was a very common imagery throughout all three presentations. Dave names it plainly. He's Sisyphus. That the rock was never his burden. It was just the illusion that was being cast upon him by his family. When you reveal the truth in a narcissistic system, the system pushes back. Not because you're wrong, but because you're no longer that social battery. Megan is stuck between rage and resignation. The money that they have in that safe, it's not about the money, it's about the autonomy. But when she speaks with calm truth instead of flaring up, the power flips. The system can't fight clarity, and thus we see people expose themselves. With Shane, they embody the future. They didn't get swept up in the sadness of losing their partner and their grandmother. Shane found a way to regulate and reframe their situation on their own, thus earning them the right to own their own peace, one clear decision at a time. And so we see how from week to week, we see changes in Precision Cycle. What we do different here is that we give them the language to be able to actually actuate and move forward. Some of the things that we worked on this week was boundary language, right? I statements, making sure that we say things like, I feel worthless when you withhold what's mine. I'm not asking for permission, I'm making a request. And really concentrating on how someone's actions makes you feel and speaking to how you feel rather than the person's actions. I feel X when Y happens. And that's really the takeaway for the week. How do we start building out these boundaries so that we can bring clarity to the enforcement? So with all three cases, we've seen how Precision Cycle has been able to move clients from a passive understanding of what's happening in their life to owning the field and understanding what the game is quite clearly, seeing the game for what it is, and then moving forward in a way that helps them protect themselves from narcissistic players. The only way we do that is through boundaries and self-actualization. That is what Precision Cycle brings. We are not therapy. We're not coaching. We are Precision Cycle, and we help you recalibrate yourself, your environment, and the people around you so you can live a more fulfilled life. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Precision Cycle BTS. I hope this has been helpful for clinicians, potential clients, or passive observers alike who want to know more about psychological process and how we differ from therapy. We don't sit and process and ask what that feels like or what that's about. We understand how can we move forward, how can we change, and how can we start creating the outcomes that are predictably going to help us get to the next place we want in our life. Precision Cycle is here for people that really want to get out of the abyss, for people that want to look within themselves and move in another direction and really want to elevate to that next level emotionally, spiritually, and from a personality perspective, have a great understanding of what exactly those 7 dimensions within them are saying and how we can approach those effectively to ensure that we're creating the guardrails to protect us and our emotions and our personality. Thank you very much to everyone who has tuned in. In July, we're running a special. Please contact me for special pricing. People that are listening to these podcasts, watching these videos, they can access special pricing in July. We also have special packages available. And we also have a referral program that will pay anybody $100 for a positive referral. That means you go out and you pitch Precision Cycle for someone. They come in and they sign up. You get $100. No strings attached. Thank you very much. My name is Enrique Arteaga. You can reach me at enrique@elevateepo.com. You can also reach me at Precision Cycle TV on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, X, and Threads. Feel free to send a DM if you'd like to start your Precision Cycle or refer someone who may be a great candidate for Precision Cycle and receive $100 for their signing up. Hope to see you again tomorrow for another episode of Precision Cycle, where we talk about Narcissism Nation, the American crossing of the Rubicon, and what we can do to come back. Look forward to hearing from you. Once again, please contact me if you have any questions, if you'd like to take advantage of our July specials, or if you'd like to just have a conversation and see how Precision Cycle can work for you. I am always available for private consultations and will be more than happy to meet with you via Zoom or in person in my office in Pasadena to discuss Precision Cycle further. Until then, thank you very much. Look forward to interacting more and have a great 4th of July. Thank you.